All right. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Indigenous Leaders Circle, AMSA Talk. I would like to welcome all of the participants today who are joining us for the event. Of course, I would like to welcome our Indigenous leaders, and they'll introduce themselves in more detail throughout the video, but then, of course, afterwards as well. But we will be welcoming JB, the First Lady, who's an artist, dancer, educator, and activist, and prominent voice for decolonization, and really an inspiration for Indigenous women and youth. I'm excited to introduce you to Tabitha Frank, who's the support coordinator with the Vancouver Aboriginal Community Policing Centre, as well as Norm Leach, who's their executive director. And I'd also like to acknowledge Lorelei Williams, who's the founder of the dance group Butterflies in Spirit, and advocate for missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, who contributed to the project but is away and unable to join us today. I would like to welcome settlement service providing organizations, community organizations, representatives from the province of BC, Ministry of Municipal Affairs, representatives from the Government of Canada, IRCC, and all of you who have taken some time out to spend with us this morning. We really appreciate you joining us for this significant event. So as a provincial umbrella association, AMSA acknowledges that BC is on the unceded homelands of First Nations who have stewarded this land since time immemorial. We recognize the privilege that we have as settlers on this land and acknowledge that AMSA's operations is on the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh Nations. We also would like to acknowledge the financial support of the province of British Columbia through the Ministry of Municipal Affairs for supporting this work and this event. The folks at the Ministry of Municipal Affairs have been amazing partners in this work, and we are very grateful for that opportunity to work closely with you. So we are on a journey together this morning for about 2.5 hours. So you really are taking some time out of your day to spend with us, and we are so grateful. I'll provide some context by speaking about the Indigenous dialogue circles we held last year and how that's taking us forward in our work on truth, reconciliation, and decolonization. So you'll see a video of the recent Indigenous Leaders Circle discussion, and then we'll follow that with a quick 10-minute break so you can step away and have some self-care opportunity. And then we'll have an opportunity to engage directly with the Indigenous leaders from the video in a Q&A dialogue session. And that's where I'm really going to encourage you to use the raise hand function, take yourself off of mute, and engage in dialogue and really have that opportunity for us to hear your voice. And after some brief closing remarks, I will wrap us at 12:30. So I'm just going to provide a little bit of context for you for how we got to where we are today. So last summer, in June through August, AMSA facilitated a series of 5 BC CIS Indigenous dialogue circles, so funded through our BC CIS funding, to connect BC CIS settlement service providers with the understanding that we are supporting settlement on unceded and occupied territory. Norm Leach, the Executive Director of the Vancouver Aboriginal Community Policing Centre, led all 5 of those Indigenous dialogue circles. And we had participants from 37 agencies from 10 BC CIS regions in BC. And about 60% of those participants were from front lines of service delivery. And each group was very small. I think the largest one we had was 10 or 11, and the smallest one we had was like 5 or 6. So it was a really great opportunity for people to be able to connect in an intimate setting. Participants shared and listened and respectfully participated in discussions and asked questions, including some difficult ones. And that was part of the intention of the circles, was to be able to ask difficult questions. They were introduced to ways of relating to Indigenous people and how they can center Indigenous presence in their work and their connection with newcomers. The circles were not recorded, and very intentionally not recorded, so everyone could speak freely. And funders also were not present for those circles. And so we actually did a couple of circles, and then we would meet with the funders and just discuss the topics and the themes that came out, and then did that again at the end of the circles. And much was realized during the 5 Indigenous circles. These initial conversations were important first steps and really opened up opportunities to think critically about our work. And through Norm's guidance in the discussions, the questions, his responses, we found 4 key themes emerged from the dialogue circles. And they are really fundamental subjects for additional learning and the foundation for our continued work together. So I'd like to share those 4 themes with you. The first was Indigenous worldview versus colonized worldview. So in the Indigenous worldview, we are all connected. We are all connected to everything in nature because we are a part of it. We're not separate. The colonized worldview says that each human is an individual. We're separate. We're alone in ourselves. And that means that every one of us is alone. People and property are to be owned and controlled. And the colonized worldview has had negative repercussions on many groups, including Indigenous populations, women, and it has led to mental health crisis, of loneliness, and of course, the environmental impacts as well. Decolonization was the second theme. And instead of focusing on reconciliation, we talked about focusing on decolonization. So reconciliation assumes there is a relationship to reconcile. However, the laws, the institutions, the treaties that were created only to benefit those who made them, and decolonization restores the Indigenous worldview and culture and replaces colonized interpretations. And we're going to get into more of this later. The fourth theme that emerged was that we all have our own indigeneity. So if you go back into your own family history, you will find that the land your family lived on for thousands of years or more, you'll find a connection to that land and a spiritual connection to that land that Indigenous people believe can't be broken. If you feel that connection, you can connect with everyone and everything. And again, you're going to hear some interesting thoughts on that in the video coming up. And the fourth theme was intergenerational trauma and the inherited survivor spirit. So we talked about how trauma is intergenerational. Survivors of residential schools pass the trauma on to their descendants. However, this does not just apply to Indigenous communities. It applies to everyone because everyone has inherited the effects of the trauma that their ancestors have experienced. However, as well as inheriting your ancestors' trauma, you also inherit their strength. You inherit their courage and their resilience, which are the qualities that enabled them to survive whatever it is that they experienced. So every one of us, including newcomers, is the product of a long line of survivors. The dialogue circles accomplished important first steps through vital initial conversations and learning. So after the circles, we asked for some very simple feedback and found out that 100% of the respondents wanted to continue engaging with us in this work. Everyone was willing to make a substantial time commitment towards listening, participating, and learning more. And this shows the level of commitment to further engagement for longer range contributions on behalf of the sector. So the BCSS Indigenous Dialogue Circle key themes, with the support of the Ministry of Municipal Affairs, we had an opportunity to build upon the dialogue circles. And as a bridge, we continued this work into this year, which brings us to where we are today. So we agreed to continue the conversation in an AMSA talk, which opens up the opportunity for participating and learning much more broadly. And we've had over 100 registrants for today's event. The foundation of this AMSA talk is a discussion about the 4 themes identified through the circles with 4 Indigenous leaders. The informal Indigenous Leaders Circle took place on February 10th at the Helping Spirit Lodge Society, and we recorded the session in a video that is really full of insights and some very different perspectives. So we're honored and grateful to the Indigenous leaders who joined us for the conversations and gave so much of themselves, speaking from their hearts and their minds. It was very moving, it was very emotional, it was at times quite intense. And I just want to say my deepest gratitude to JB, Tabitha, Norm, and Lorelei for really bearing the emotional labor of that day. And we talk about emotional labor in the video, but I think it's important to continuously recognize that Indigenous people bear the emotional labor of these conversations. So over the next hour and 10 minutes, we will share the video recording of the leaders' discussion. And then we're going to open up for comments, thoughts, questions. It really will be much more impactful if we can have a dialogue. So I ask that you don't just put questions in the chat, but that you actually unmute yourself and engage in conversation. That is really the only way forward, is if we are brave enough to engage in conversation. So we will invite you to submit questions. If you really, really can't bring yourself to speak, we invite you to submit questions throughout the morning using either the chat or by email to Rebecca. Rebecca is going to receive your questions through her email at rferguson@amsa.org. So maybe jot that one down as well. And I'm sure we'll put it in the chat. So rferguson@amsa.org. And so your questions and comments will be directed to our guests during the Q&A session. So it is 10:15 exactly. Look at that. It's 10:15 and on the agenda it says 10:15 view Indigenous Leaders Circle video recording. And so without further ado, I'm going to ask you to sit back and really enjoy watching this very, very moving and very inspirational video. Thank you.
My name is Katie, and I'm with AMSA. I've been with AMSA since 2014. I have 2 little girls. One is 4. Her name is Olivia, and I have a 13, almost 14-year-old named Sophie. And so they are my everything. But I get the opportunity to work with these awesome folks, doing this work and supporting organizations who work with immigrants, refugees, and newcomers, looking at how we can support them with things like training, networking, bringing them together to have conversations, and looking at policy and immigration policy and how that impacts their service delivery with the clients that they're working with. But another big role for us is looking at what are the issues, what is happening in Canada, and how do we make sure that organizations can support newcomers in really learning and being a part of the community in everything that the community has to offer, and understanding their not just their rights in Canada, but also their responsibilities. And so we're, as an organization, I think we're doing a lot to listen and to learn. I think we need to move beyond listening and learning, and we need to be taking action. And so with Norm and with some of our members who are really engaged in this work, we've started having these conversations about what do we do now? What's our responsibility? And JB, we were talking about this. What's our responsibility as a sector that welcomes newcomers to unceded and stolen land? And how do we grapple with our role as organizations that are funded by government entities welcoming newcomers on unceded and stolen lands? And so that's what brings me here today to meet with the group of you. So I appreciate having you here and being in this space with you. It is very much a privilege.
My name is Tabitha Frank. My given name is Huya. I come from the Clayoquot, Hausut, and Muchlet First Nations from Vancouver Island. And I work for the Vancouver Aboriginal Community Policing Center. My new position is the support coordinator. And yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Thanks, Tabitha.
Norm Leach, Executive Director at the Vancouver Aboriginal Community Policing Center. Heritage, which is, I'm from the Tl'it'lit community in the X'tl'it Nation, which is, our community surrounds the town of Lillooet. But I was born and raised in Vancouver, East Van kid. And yeah, happy to be part of the conversation. It's been an amazing journey working with the Community Policing Center. It's been 5 years now, and really immersed in the injustices of the urban Indigenous people and the roots of those injustices in colonization and the traumas of colonization. So, and then being able to find approaches and methods and techniques that work. And amazingly, those are rooted in our ancient cultures and our connections to land and ancestors and everything. And that's where we find the healing and the source of everything that's possible for Indigenous people. And it's very inspiring work, and so I'm happy to be part of the conversation, especially with people who are unaware. The settler and immigrant population is completely unaware. They just know what they've heard. And most of that is all wrong and a lot of lies. So if we can correct that and change that, then awesome. So yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Norm.
My name is Lorelei Williams. I am from Shakati Nations on my mom's side, Sta'elis on my dad's side. I do a lot of work around the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. I am a single mom, which is most important. My daughter is 16, she'll be, oh my God, 17 in a few weeks. My son is 13. I am the artistic director with Ariosa Dance Society, but I kind of have my own business now. Actually, my work followed me from the Vancouver Aboriginal Community Policing Center and all the work that I do in the community. I'm still trying to figure out that title. It's kind of going towards gender-based violence intervention and prevention consultant. I think I got that right. I'm not sure. I have it written down and I'm trying to grasp it still. I didn't even realize I was doing this work on my own until somebody pointed it out.
Yao Sadam Hooks Epsalks New Hulk Onondaga Wolf Clan. Etzalk Maswaniks Ragatero JB the First Lady, Geraldine Webster. I said, hello friends and family. I come from the New Hulk Nation and the Onondaga Nation. I'm Wolf Clan, and I carry a lot of names. My first New Hulk name is Etzalk, which means South Bentic. That's where my dad's family, the Snook-Yaltoa family, that's where our village was before colonization. There's an estimation of 30,000 New Hulkum people, but after the genocide of smallpox, we went to 1%. So I come from 300 people who survived smallpox in that area. My second New Hulk name is the Four Carpenters, Maswaniks, which they created the water, the land, and the air, and brought the light. So my family respects the work that I do for standing up for the land, and they wanted to give me this name as protection, but also to uplift the work and remind me of the work that I do. My second name is a Mari name that I was given, Ragatero, which means people weaver. I do a lot of workshops for young people and all the way up to elders, residential school survivors, and bringing people together and hosting rallies to speak out against injustices for Indigenous people, and also Powwow MC. That's one of our favorite celebrations. And my family is raising me to be a speaker of our family. So not only that, in a traditional ceremonial sense, but also in music. I am a hip-hop MC, and my hip-hop MC name is JB the First Lady, and my English name is Geraldine Webster. So, and I'm so happy to be here to sit on this panel with these amazing people who do such great work in the community and really have strong voices and strong hearts and minds to do this work for justice for our Indigenous people, but also do that emotional labor to bring awareness where we really need to bring awareness. So I'm so happy to be here.
JB, can we keep going with that piece that you just said on emotional labor? Because you and I were talking about that earlier, and we were talking about the fact that JB has done some work with organizations that work with newcomers. So some work with Rainbow Refugee and some work through the Vancouver Settlement Worker in Schools program, and we were talking about when you give your emotional labor, or how do you know when to give your emotional labor? And I think that that's something that that comes up a lot, which is there's you know, Indigenous folks in Canada make up 4% of the population, and there's a lot of demand on your time, your energy, your effort. Speak to us, talk to us, open our event, do this for us, tell me what to do, tell us what to do. How do you navigate that emotional labor piece? How do you navigate when you want to engage, when you don't engage, and move us through that? That would be really interesting to hear from you on that.
Yeah, for me as an artist, I use my music and my artistry as a way of processing, taking a breath, processing the heaviness so that I can transform it in the healthiest way possible, that it's not going to hurt anyone, that I'm going to be saying the truth, because there's so many, like Norm said, there's so many lies. So bringing the truth through this music, almost this music is a place of oral history, to say, I'm capturing the moment of the injustices that are happening right now, so that it's gonna be an archive for my great-grandchildren, and hopefully a marker to say, I'm not gonna be advocating for clean water on reservations, or missing a murdered Indigenous woman where we see a missing poster, a new one every day. So I want that. For me, I let it go into my music. I let it go into, like, also accessing the medicines and the culture of our Indigenous people and the teachings that we receive to heal ourselves. So for me, if it's gonna heal someone, if it's gonna bring understanding, then I'm here for it. And if they have a good heart, mind, and spirit, and they want to receive what are people who are doing this type of work, then I'm here for that.
See, I love that.
Yeah.
But the people here, the way to make it not work, because sometimes it just feels like it's just work, is they make it their art, right? And so then it's their art and it's their spirit that's expressing all of it, whether it's the hurt or the sadness or the pain, but they're expressing it, and then everyone else can understand it because they're speaking a language that is not a colonized language, right? It's not English, it's art, it's music, it's dance, it's poetry, and you can sense it without having to read the words, and that's awesome. I think that's the way forward and they're leading the way.
It's emotionally draining. Anytime I speak, anytime I dance, even when I do these interviews, media, like everything it's very emotionally draining, and it can wear out your body. I always make sure I have medicines around. I speak to my elders. I do a lot of self-care. I eat what I want after I speak. I'm Indigitarian, which is vegan, but I will still eat my traditional foods, my traditional Indigenous foods. But after performances or after speaking, I don't care what I eat. Like I'll have some meat, and sometimes it tastes weird to me now, but I'll for sure have my spicy noodles. Even doing self-care before I speak, like getting my hair done or nails, I just need all of that, because a lot of my friends and family, allies, like I don't want to say allies, I haven't seen one yet come down or be emotionally taxed or drained. It's mostly my friends around me, people that I know who are doing hard work. I've seen people go into the hospitals. I've seen what it's done to their bodies. I was once at an event down in the States, and we were eating at a restaurant, and the youngest one, she was 18 years old at the time, she had to excuse herself. She said, "I'm sorry, I have to leave early, but I have a doctor's appointment." And her mom said, yeah, something's wrong with her, but we don't know what's wrong. The doctors don't know what's wrong. And then she said, I feel like it's the work that she's doing around missing and murdered women. And because she had started doing her work at 16 years old down in Montana. And then once she said that, the rest of the people at the table said, yep, I have this is wrong with me, they don't know, or everybody except for myself. So I was sitting there like, wow, like shocked to hear all of that. But I feel like my trauma training that I have in Indigenous focusing oriented therapy on complex trauma has really helped me to be able to protect myself and do the work that I'm doing. I also have people who protect me as well, and actually JB is one of those people. We had this event called the Red Party, and I guess all these things were happening that were stressful situations that would have stressed me out, but JB took those on. And it was like when JB told me about it after, I was like, oh my God, that happened. But it was like she was blocking them from me because knowing I was, dealing with that event. So yeah, I have to do a lot to protect myself emotionally because, we're being asked to speak at a lot of events, sometimes for free. I had one of my friends tell me, who does a lot of work around the issue of MMIWG and the environment, she told me, Lorelai, you have to stop doing this work for free. And I was like, but I want to get the message out there. I feel like I need to tell people. But she's like, no, at the end of the day, it's going to wear your body out. Who's going to take care of that bill? Who's going to take care of that hospital bill? Who's going to take care of your kids if you're not able to walk, if you're not able to move? And I was just like, okay. And I saw her with my own eyes. I was just like, I seen what it did to her. So it's very important to protect myself. I know what emotions are involved, and I do what I can to protect myself.
There's a huge ask, and even convening us here today, as an organization, we grapple with this. We grapple with like, are we contributing? Are we contributing to that emotional burden? And I don't ever want to do that. I don't ever want to be the cause of you feeling the weight and bearing all of that labor. All of that it's going to come onto you today. And it's, for me, that's, again, it comes back to us as settlement providers. We're trying to figure out how we're in this space, of welcoming newcomers to unceded and stolen lands. What's our role? What's our accountability? How do I take accountability? And looking at the privilege I have, the inherent privilege. I didn't do anything to earn it. I just have it. And then how am I accountable to you, to this land, to to the future? How am I accountable to your children, my children? I don't want my children repeating the things that I've experienced over my lifetime, and I'm still learning, and I want them to be better and do better and know better. And so I think we're trying to figure out in the sector how we can do better. And I think, Norm, you said, working, and JP, we talked about this before as well, working with newcomers, a lot of them don't know about the history of the land. And so when we had a series of dialogue circles this summer, and Norm came and spoke, we brought small groups together. So there was like, anywhere kind of between 8 and 12 of us in these groups. And they were from all over the province. And we brought the groups together, and we said to them beforehand, this is your opportunity to ask anything you want, ask the question, because many of the people providing services in the settlement sector are newcomers themselves. And so a lot of them had their own questions and their own things that they didn't know. And so we said, ask any question you want. And so we compiled all the questions beforehand, and some were really robust and some were a bit more hesitant. And then we brought people into the dialogue circles. And then out of the dialogue circles, we had these themes emerge, right? These 4 themes. And so the themes that emerged were an indigenous worldview versus a colonized worldview, decolonization. We all have our own indigeneity, and the intergenerational trauma and the inherited survivor spirit. And those were the four kind of themes that came out of these discussions. We didn't present them beforehand. It's just all the conversations seemed to lead us to these four themes. And so what would be really great today would be to hear from you about maybe some of your perspectives on those themes, and wondering if maybe as a starting point we could look at the concept of everyone having their own indigeneity, everyone being indigenous to somewhere in their family history, and finding that spiritual connection, and whether you think that that might be something that is a path forward for people, if they can go back in their own minds and look at their own indigeneity. And Norm, is there anything that you wanted to kind of add to that part of the discussion?
Well, probably the way I begin that is the way I do a land acknowledgement at the beginning. And so if I did one right now, so I would say, I begin by acknowledging the land itself first, because the land was here first. The land is actually, from our indigenous perspective, our greatest grandmother. She's our ancestor, she's a relative. She's not property, she never was. She's the ancestor we share with the dinosaurs. We know that every cell and molecule of our bodies came from the land. And for us, it's this land. And so we know that everything we've ever received came from her. Everything. And we know we can never, ever even begin to repay all that we've received from the land. But we also know that she's given all these things that we've received without question, without limit, without condition, without interruption forever. And that is essentially the definition of love. So we know the land loves us. And we feel that every minute of every day. And then I acknowledge the people who've taken care of these lands. And for here where we are in Vancouver, it's been the Musqueam and the Squamish and the Tsleil-Waututh people who've cared for these lands for 15,000 years, since at least the end of the last ice age. And they've done such a good job taking care of these lands, as they were taught of taking care of their first grandmother, that it was actually better than new when the explorers arrived, because they understood it was their responsibility to leave it as good as or better than it was provided. And they did. That's why the salmon runs were so unbelievable. The forests were so magnificent. Everything, the buffalo herds, everything was beyond everyone's experience on this planet. And we remember still, because it wasn't that long ago for us. And so that's how I acknowledge the land. And so we thank them, people, for taking such good care of these lands so that we could sit here today and sit in a circle and use those gifts from the land to help each other and ourselves and the people and the land as well. So that's how I acknowledge the land to begin. And I think then it reminds people that they too, in their family history, came from a land where their family lived 1,000 years or more. So they had a relationship with that land there. But in the movement, in the dislocation, in the displacement, in the colonization, people, that connection is not as strong as ours still is. And they forget. And they start to be able to think of her not as a relative, as an ancestor, as a grandmother, but as property, as a resource. And that ends up being the roots of the difference between a colonized worldview and an indigenous worldview. And so we try to remind people that you too have these roots somewhere, someplace, sometime. And your body remembers. And that's the roots of the training that we use together to protect ourselves and to heal and to find that strength, because it's all rooted in the land. And if you can access it, life is good.
So we you know, you touched on one of the other four, which is the indigenous worldview versus a colonized worldview. You know, just off the top of your heads, what are your perspectives on that, on an indigenous worldview versus a colonized worldview? Do you have any thoughts on that one, Tabitha?
Actually, yeah, I was thinking about my son. He is in high school.
Okay.
And it was a couple of years ago. He was in social studies, and they were teaching about history, their history, according to them. And he was upset. He was sitting there, and I didn't realize that he knew this, but he was sitting there, and they were talking about Indigenous people not existing anymore, and then he stood up. He looks white passing, so they didn't know that he was Native. Mm-hmm. So he stood up, he was like, but we're still here. And then the teacher got mad at him for disrupting the class, and he got sent to the office. And they called me while I was at work, and they were talking about, yeah, Ethan was being very disruptive and got angry, and he stormed out. And I was like, what happened? So why did he get upset? And they were telling me a different story. They were saying that he was just being disruptive and he was not agreeing with the teacher. And then I was like, can you put my son on the phone? So he told me like his side. Like he was like, oh, well, they were saying that Native people don't exist anymore, and it made me mad because he's like, I'm Native, you're Native, my dad's Native. And I was like, oh. I was like, well, they told me a different story. They said that you were being disruptive and that you were disagreeing with your teacher. And he was like, no. He was like, I'm mad because he's like, why did they think that we're not here? This is the first time he's ever experienced, I want to say, is it racism? Would it be considered racism? Yeah, but that was the first time he's experienced it, and he was angry, and he started crying. And I asked to talk to the principal again. I was like, well, I see why he's upset. I see why he's mad. And he has every right to be mad. He has every right to feel the way he's feeling. And for you to tell him that that's not okay, that's bad on your part. Because we are Native and we are still here. And because of that, he actually made some sort of change in their social studies. And as of yesterday, he was telling me that they're starting to like try contribute Indigenous culture. And he's like, Mom, guess what? And I was like, what happened? And he was like, we were watching the show and I saw my Auntie Lorelei. I have no idea. I asked him, but he said that they popped it on, and he's like, that's my Auntie Lorelei. But yeah, he made some sort of change by just standing up and saying, like, that's not fair. Like, we're still here. Mm-hmm. And it was kind of cool because that was 2 years ago.
Yeah. The education system is the white system, and I've had experiences with my daughter actually, and thankfully she stands up as well. It's just, yeah, it's very frustrating because we're always fighting for different, I feel like I'm fighting a different issue every single day. But I think another thing was brought up about we still don't exist, like we're still not here. I do a lot of work internationally. I go down and I speak in the States, in Mexico, Colombia, all of those places I've been to. And more so down in Mexico and Colombia, whenever I spoke about the issues up here, missing and murdered, the residential schools, all of that, I always get the same response. The first one is always like, wow, I didn't know Indigenous people actually existed. I thought Canada was all white people. every single time that happens. Like, and of course they did not know that the issue of MMIWG was a huge issue up here. And when I talk about the residential school system, they just are so shocked. And they always say, I kid you not, every single person always says this to me whenever they talk to me, why did they target the children? I cannot believe they targeted those little children. You know, so yeah, and it's in my moments of travel that I realized something about my connection, my indigeneity, and this is going back to the question before. You know, I've gone down to the States, Mexico, all those places to speak. I always felt like I was at home. I always felt some sort of connection. It wasn't until I went to Austria that I felt so disconnected around all these white people who had no idea about our history in Canada. And so I felt so out of place. And there was this white lady there, and she was from the States. And she was just like, I love Austria. I love this place. I always feel so connected. And she grew up in the States. And she's like, I was, and so I'm like, well, yeah. She's like, I come here like as much as I can. And I was like, well, that's awesome. And then I was like, where are your people from? Like, where's your white from? And she was like, oh, it's just like over, I can't even remember. It was not far from where we were. And I was like, don't you see, like, this is probably why you feel so connected here, because your people are from here. And she's like, oh, but I grew up in the States. And she wasn't getting what I was saying. And I was like, no, but your people are from here. And this is why you feel like you're at home. And she's like, I don't think she got it, but I was trying to explain it to her, you know? So, because you like you said, we're all indigenous to somewhere, you know? And yeah.
I remember Vicki Reynolds talks about your dirt. Where's your dirt, right? And so Vicki says, you know, her dirt is Newfoundland and with an Irish descent, right? That's her dirt. And so when you were saying that, I was thinking, well, it's because they're standing on their dirt, right? That's going to be the same dirt as wherever they're indigenous to. So we were talking about the young people, weren't we? You know, and Lorelei, I think that's the first time I've heard that people outside of Canada have said, why did they target the children? What do you see, maybe JB, you can talk about this a little bit as some of the way forward in terms of raising immigrant youth who are more conscious of settler colonialism in Canada, so that their parents might not have learned it when they got here, they might not have learned it before they came, but they're here, they're growing up here. And what are the ways that we can raise immigrant youth who are more conscious of this? And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, what Canada has done to people around the world is like a Jedi mind trick, basically, telling lies about that we don't even exist. What's happening here in this time is like we're actually having the words and the knowledge to deconstruct these acts of colonial violence. And we're having the evidence, like, of the 215 young people, unmarked graves, and Kamloops residential school. And then now across Canada, it's over 7,000. Just more recently, Williams Lake, 93 bodies as well. So, like, we are all still learning about the actual atrocities, the violence that has been happening to our people. Sorry, it's just like really intense because I've been working on bringing awareness to residential school and what has happened there since I've been a teenager. Through the arts, I did a theater production and Canada didn't listen to our elders, didn't hear our elders our elders went through the process, you know, giving 93 recommendations on how they can heal ourselves and how can Canada help. And Canada has continued to fail our Indigenous people. And just looking at different like academic people, like our friend Dr. Lisa Monchalin, she has an amazing book called The Colonial Problem. And what she talks about is that we as people, as a community, as just like humans, it's not actually Indigenous people's problem, where Canada really says like, oh, at addiction, oh, homelessness, oh, poverty, oh, just like kids in care. There's like so many things saying, oh, that's Indigenous problem. But actually it's a colonial problem. And it's not just that's not even our way. It's the colonial way that has been pushed onto our people for this exact reason. And that reason is for the extraction of the land. They're trying to push us out still to this day. Colonialism, acts of violence, genocide is still happening in this moment today. We did not just survive, we are still surviving, and it's happening to us right now. So we are finally having the words to advocate for ourselves, to speak up, and to unlearn, and to deconstruct these acts of violence towards our bodies. And like Norm said, we come from the land. So what happens to the land? If there's like people trying to own it, extract it for oil, clear cut it, basically that is rape of the land, which is one of the highest issues in our communities, is missing and murdered women, two-spirit, trans. So how do we stand up for that? Is to advocate and stand up. Because right now in Dr. Lisa Monchalin's book, The Colonial Problem, says all these systems were built on racism, which gives access to people to allow Canada or corporations to be harmful and to do genocide on Indigenous people. So that's why it's so important to stand up, no matter where you are, where you come from. And when you're decolonizing, it's not just for Indigenous people to decolonize, it's for all people to decolonize. And what's amazing for immigrant and refugee people is that they have their culture, they have their songs, their dances, their ceremonies, and they have their land. But they've been displaced, right? So when I talk to the immigrant community, I say, don't try to be Canadian. Don't try to lose your accent. Don't try to lose your language, because that's what keeps you safe, is your land, which is what Lorelei and Norm talked about.
Yeah, I think the language is a really good example of that.
That's the most important, and the reason why the language is so important, which I've learned and what I've been taught by elders, is that when you know your language, your ancestors speak the language, so now they can finally identify who you are. So when us as Indigenous people get our Indigenous names, our Indian names, is so our ancestor can talk to us and say, granddaughter, daughter, niece, I know who you are now. And that's what Canada did to our people, is to try to take us away from our families, displace our families, so that we wouldn't be able to make that spiritual connection to our ancestors. Because that's where everything comes from. The land is where our songs, dances, ceremonies, language comes from. That's why the land is so important. The way our language is spoken is the way the mountain ranges look, the way the river flows or the birds singing. That's maybe how our songs, drumming, has come apart. So Canada has really lied to a lot of people, and they're not taking accountability for it because they want access to the land. But we're still here, and we're not going anywhere, and we're rebuilding and revitalizing, and there's such a strong, forceful, jubilant young people who are so strong and who are rebuilding with our elders who are still alive. And they're still here. We're so incredible. As Indigenous people, we go through so much, but look at how much we've come through. And we're still going through. And we're so incredible. And we have such beauty in our works. From our beadwork, to our cedar hats, to our ribbon skirts, to our button blankets. That's not even half of it.
Quick question then. So when you talk about your name, many newcomers, when they come, anglicize their name. And that is something that we've talked to people about not doing, about not anglicizing your name, about encouraging people to call you by your given name and learn how to say your name. Would you go as far as to say that that is an act of decolonization to keep your own name?
Yes, 100%.
But to me, that illustrates a big challenge, which is the reason we sit here today. How do we communicate that in a way that engages people here, that it's not just up in here? And unfortunately, the only tools that I have is the English language. Others are finding art and creative ways of expressing those ways of being. But to reconnect people with the idea that it is not just an urban Indigenous problem here in Canada, and it's not just us, it's you too, right? Because colonization wasn't invented here. It was invented a long time before they got here. It was just much better, much more efficient and effective and developed when it got here, maybe perfected. And that's why they know to target the children. Because if you really want to take the land away from a people, this is the way you take away the language, take away the children, take away the land, and then it's done. It's just that people have forgotten their own family history of when it was done to their ancestors. And once we are able to share that in a way that people can understand it, holy cow, this is our fight too. This is the root of our ancestral trauma too. When this was done to my ancestors 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago, and now it's happening here to these people. And when are humans going to wake up and say, we need to stop doing this? Like, colonization should have been made a crime against humanity 1,000 years ago. But it's not, and it's still not. So if we can find those ways of, and I point out especially women, nobody has suffered more or longer under colonization than women, and then children. Then we would start to recognize what really we're all fighting against, those same injustices. But we get focused on here and now, and our close friends and family and allies. But really it's the same fight going on around the world for 1,000 years or more. And if we're able to begin that conversation, build that understanding, then I think it's going to serve everybody better.
people have always been so receptive to when you speak to our sector and to our members is around the survivor spirit and the ways that that survivor spirit is passed through generations, so that while trauma is passed through generations, the survivor spirit is also passed through generations. And so, you know, many newcomers, when they arrive in Canada, have trauma. They have trauma either in their very recent history, they have trauma maybe deeper in their history. It's there somewhere. And so, you know, knowing that there's that thread that runs through all of us around the survivor spirit, what are some ways that we can, what are some of the ways that you think that we can support newcomers in their understanding of their own, not just the relationship to their own land and their own indigeneity, but how now that they're here, how they can experience, heal, and move forward in a good way, move forward, and you know, have a life and have a family and have a home here in a good way, reconciling that trauma that they might bring with them, but then also celebrating the survivor spirit, and then also looking at what the next best steps are for them and for their children. So any kind of maybe parting thoughts on that?
I'm thinking about this little boy in Mexico. I was down there over the summer searching for the disappeared, like ground search, boots on the ground. We actually found 14 to 16 remains. This little boy was with us, and he's actually the same age as my son. He didn't speak any English. I don't speak Spanish. I was so shocked to see him there with us, but he was searching for his brother. Him and his mom were on this, involved in this brigade. He was digging in the dirt. He was helping with everything. And I was amazed watching this little boy learning about the issues of the disappeared in Mexico and just being there. And being there is so, it triggered my trauma. But again, my trauma training has helped me in it. But just for that little boy to be there, I was just like, wow. We were having dinner later on, and I randomly got asked to speak about Canada. Like, it wasn't planned or anything, and they asked me to speak about MMIWG here, the kids, the residential schools, everything. Because at this point, they had heard, like everybody around the world had heard about the 215 children. So at that point, they had an idea. That was the first time I ever experienced them actually having an idea about the children. And so with that boy, like with that boy in your question, I feel like educating anybody as soon as possible is the best way to do it. Kids are they're little sponges, right? But I think any immigrant coming in here needs to know the truth, needs to know our history. Because when I spoke to all the families of the disappeared there, he was like leaning forward and listening, and I paid attention to him. I was just like, wow, he's like really listening. And then after that, when we went back to the dirt, he was watching me, making sure I was okay, making sure like I could understand, like even on the bus, oh, does she know? Like he would tell his mom to tell the translators to tell me whatever was happening, you know? But I feel like you start as soon as possible educating them about our history here.
You know, it's interesting how we keep coming back to young people, and we keep coming back to like new, fresh minds, and we've come back several times to, well, that's how, like Norm says, that they perfected it by the time they got to Canada, because they knew exactly what to do, right? You take the kids. You want the land. You want to take people. You want to cut people out at the knees. You take the children. And when we talk about building knowledge and when we talk about moving forward, we keep coming back to the children and the young people, and it really seems like that's a common thread. And Lorelei, your experience with this young person in Mexico, like it seems to be where we come back to.
I've had a lot of white people messaging me after the children were found, asking me what's an appropriate age to teach my child about this, what's appropriate. And I'm like, you know, I don't think I responded to a lot of those, but you know, I think about my own children, and because of the work that I do, they were in it, they seen it. When I was working at the Vancouver Aboriginal Community Policing Center, I had to bring my kids to work one day, and it just happened to be at the TRC event at the, what was it called again? At the Peony Coliseum. That big, huge event there. We had a table there, and I had no other option but to bring my kids who were young. My son was so tiny, he was 4. They had these big, huge poles with the pictures of the children, like bigger than life size, all over those poles. They were black and white, and my son was so tiny. He was looking up at them, and he was like, "Mom, what is that?" And so I'm looking at him like, oh shoot, okay, I have to have this conversation now. And then of course my daughter was there, and I had to explain it in a way. You just know what you can tell your child, right? And then yeah, we went home later that night, and there just happened to be a commercial with an Indigenous kid. I think it was for that show. I can't remember that show.
Trickster?
No, before that. Blackstone. And there was a kid in the desk and a white person, I think, and he was like, "Mommy, is that residential school?" And I was like, no, because it was a totally different thing, but he was getting it, you know. But being in my life, of course, he's my child, I felt bad about this one time. He was like, "Mommy, is my culture missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls?" And I was like, oh, and I had to explain that whole thing. But because he was in it so much, like, that's what he thought, you know?
He grew up with it. Like, he has an aunt that has been missing 2 years before he was even born, but he remembers her, like he's connected with her. And he's always brought up his aunt, Lisa Marie, and he would talk about her. And then when I got connected with Lorelei, he was wanting me to represent his aunt, to dance with butterflies in spirit and represent Lisa. And he's always known it, and he's always known about MMIWG. And in a way, it's hard to like, I don't know how to say it, but it's like, it's pretty sad that they know about these things. They shouldn't have to. They shouldn't have to experience it. They shouldn't have to go through that at such a young age. Yeah.
And actually, the most influential thing that brought my activist spirit, my advocate spirit alive was actually when I was 5 years old. During 1990, the Oka was happening, and there's an amazing documentary. I encourage you to watch it. It's by Alainez Bompsewin. It's Genestake 500 Years. And it just breaks down how Canada brought armed forces to an Indigenous Mohawk community because they're standing up. They said, you can't make a golf course on our burial grounds. And they protected the land there. But Canada brought 2,000 soldiers with tanks, and the Indigenous Mohawk people occupied for about 90 days. So there's this one image that's very prominent when you go back to that, is an Indigenous warrior and an Canadian Army guy going face to face. And that exact image is what activated my spirit to stand up for the people. I said, Mommy, why is the soldier against Indians? And she said it so plainly. She said, daughter, Canada doesn't like Indians. So I was like, okay. From then, that day forward, I was 5 years old, I said, I will stand up for our people to say that you can't treat us that way. You can't have an army towards our people, to harm our people. I want to protect and stand up. So I was that young and understood. And it's been the guide to my life's work, to my music, to my artistry, to my voice. And my mom has always encouraged me, because even at that time, when I was 5 years old, a lot of racism was happening across Canada. And I remember in my daycare and in the school system, the teachers and the care workers put their hands on me. And I had to have a meeting with my mom and myself, and I had to stand up for myself at 5 years old to say, you can't hit me.
I've been through the same situation as you in elementary school. They had a teacher kick me and push me, and she told the principal that it was my fault. So my dad had to pull me out of school and say, no, you're not going to be hitting my child. You're not going to be pushing my child. I think it was in grade 7. I don't remember how old I was, but grade 7.
So yeah, that racism, that thought process of putting down Indigenous people in the media, that's why representation in all walks of life, from news to media to social media to movies to television to academics. Like, I've spoken at English 12 First Nations. All they read is First Nations authors. So incredible. So that work is slowly happening. But that's why Indigenous representation and in those all sectors is so important, because like acts of violence, when people don't understand Indigenous history, that's what can happen to us, is people can put hands on a 5-year-old or in elementary school, and that's not right.
But that's powerful. So the words of JB's mother, 4 words, and that might be what it boils down to. Canada doesn't like Indians. And that's, I don't know if it has to be more plain or honest and truthful than that. And if people who watch this can hear one thing and learn one thing and act from one idea, that might be it to understand, and that might explain all their questions. But then they have to act, right? And they can't just sit with it and do nothing with it, but because they have to listen, and I boil it down to listen and help. And if they really want to, then they've got to spend some time, and they can't just take JB's word for it that they're awesome, and that they're incredible, and that they're fun, and that there's so much here. They've got to spend some time, and they've got to listen and then help. Because it's not just helping these people, they'll be helping themselves too, because the Indigenous way of being, in comparison to the colonized way of being, is just better for everyone and everything. It just is. And I think we could all agree that, man, colonization has led us down this road to this place, And just look what it's done to British Columbia in 200 years. It is not as good as new anymore. And if people could hear those 4 words and understand that we have a better way, we always had a better way, then maybe they'll come and spend some time and help. But it can't be, they can't come with answers, they can't come with solutions, they have to listen and help.
I actually learned this from my teachers. One the other day, he said he was teaching something outside of what he was supposed to be teaching. He's like, I'm just gonna say this. You know, governments are supposed to be protecting the people in their country. And I was like, wow. That really hit me hard, because I was like, that's not happening to me. That doesn't happen to me, my daughter, Indigenous women and girls across this country, and especially not Mother Earth. And I was like, wow, like, we're the people of these lands, and the government is doing the exact opposite. And I was just like, whoa. I was like, I know this, but to hear it said in that way, I was just like, okay. And again, I heard from another teacher in the same program. I don't know the exact quote, but he said, Murray St. Clair said this, that, you know, you could get rid of all the racist people working in all these racist systems, but those policies are still there. It's those policies that keep this country racist, and that's still killing our people. You know, we still, like JB said, the genocide is still happening. And I can go on and on and on about the genocide, but I won't, because we have to go. But yeah, those really stuck out to me recently. So.
Yeah, one of the biggest policies that stand out for me is the Indian Act. And basically, that's the most racist policy in the world, for a policy to be based on a race and say that Indigenous people are wards, so like kids in care, are wards of the government. So just even hearing that and like is very jarring. So when people come to Canada, if they could understand how Canada treats the Indigenous people of their country, saying that they are wards and that they have a whole policy around them and have even 2 ministries for Indigenous people, that's outrageous. I can't believe that is still happening to this day, because like Norm said, the Indigenous people were here. There was an estimation in the Heiltsuk Nation, Bella Bella, that they were here on that land for over 10,000 years. Canada has only been here for 150. And we have to remember that. So just even those 2 facts, that really like helps you deconstruct what's happening for our Indigenous communities, and how do we help that? How do we, well, like Norm said, listen to Indigenous people.
We're going to go beyond the what do we want people to know, and we're going to ask you, what do we want people to do? Do you want to start?
Sure. I think maybe do your research on MMIWG or do your research on residential school. Those are the 2 big main issues right now. And I think it'd be really cool to see other people know more instead of us telling you what we've experienced.
Thank you.
I've thought about this recently, and I think it's take the example of these people, these women, and create art. Do something that is beyond the language, that comes from your spirit. If these ideas, this knowledge moves you, touches you, express that in a way that goes beyond English, or that speaks to other people's spirit. Because that's, I think it's been said many times, it's the artists who will lead change. And that's the things that people will create will speak to people in ways that we cannot say in this colonized language. So if they can do that, if people can do that, and then post it on TikTok, apparently, then that will, we have no idea what is possible through something like that. So I would say do that.
I think for newcomers, I'm going to go off of Huyet's, what Huyet said. And yeah, do the research. I am always out there telling people to read Suffer the Little Children, which, if you're going to understand all of the issues that have happened with our people, you know, genocide is, that's, people have to understand that genocide, a lot of people don't think it happened or is happening, and that book legally proves it. So I highly recommend Suffer the Little Children. Suffer the Little Children by Tamara Starblanket, and of course the one that JB mentioned, The Colonial Problem by Lisa Monchalin, Dr. Lisa Monchalin.
She's the first
Indigenous woman to get her PhD in criminology, and she's at law school right now. And she's my butterfly, one of my best friends.
Yeah, so what I would love for people to do is, there's a lot of amazing filmmakers. There's a lot of authors, there's a lot of musicians, there's a lot of dancers who are expressing what is happening and capturing these important moments that people need to know and understand. But if there's like an Indigenous event that's happening in your community, every February 14th, there's the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's March in the downtown east side. Happens every year. It's happening for the last 35 years. If there's a powwow, if there's Hobier, Hobier's Niska New Year, if you see events where Indigenous people are, you are welcome. You do not have to be Indigenous. Come enjoy our foods. Come enjoy our beadwork and the vendors. Come enjoy our singing and our dancing. And seeing us practice our culture is very powerful. You'll feel it in your heart and your mind and your spirit. And if you see Indigenous theater, go to it. Any talks, there's so much out there. It's about stepping forward and stepping in and celebrating. And we invite you. Indigenous people want people to come. We want to share food. We want to give food. We want to, so come, be with us.
And do a land acknowledgement.
And give the land back. Land back. Yeah. So easy. It is so easy. So an Indigenous worldview is completely on the opposite spectrum of colonial view. Colonial views is more like about capitalism. How much can you get? What can you own? Whereas Indigenous view is about how much can I nurture, take care, give away, especially in our potlatch ceremonies. the chief who is the most high ranking is the one who takes care of his family and his village. And the more he get at the end of every potlatch ceremony, you do give away. So the more high ranking you look or you are is because how much you give away. So it's like those types of teachings. Another example of Indigenous worldview is that every nation has their different ways of traditional governance systems. And actually the US Constitution and the US way of how they built their government is built on Indigenous Haudenosaunee culture. The reason why it doesn't fully work though in the States is because they took away the matriarchal sense of that because they had the clan mothers. They took away in the United States and made it into a patriarchal based governance system, which that's why it does not work, because then it capitalizes and takes from women, just all women in general, and harms them. So we have very strong structures, which is individual to our nations, of ways of conducting and having policies that fit towards the land. You can't just put Canada for 200 years. We already have traditional ways of governance. So that Indigenous worldview has been culturally appropriated multiple times to different nations. And so yeah, it's very important that we uplift Indigenous ways, because imagine if the environmentalists or Canada listened to Indigenous people on how to take care of the environment. I don't think we would be at where we're at today if Indigenous led that way, because we're in harm's way now in the environment and we're harming the environment. And it only took 150 years to do that. So let Indigenous people lead the way. We have the answers.
Let Indigenous women.
Yeah.
Yes. Tell them, Norm.
There you go.
I hope you enjoyed our video. Norm and Tabitha and JB, I hope you enjoyed seeing yourselves on video. So we would now like to open up for comments, thoughts, questions. This is the talk part of the AMSA talk. And so the Q&A session is, it's a vital element of this talk. And again, I don't want you to just have questions. I also want you to be able to share your comments or your thoughts or your reflections. You heard a lot, and you had an opportunity to see 4 people really open up and share with you. And I think it would be wonderful for you to open up and share back with them as well. So I think we'll start with maybe just some reflections from Norm and Tabitha and JB. It would be great to see how you're doing, check in, how are you feeling, how are you in your space today? JB, do you want to start us off? It's so good to see you.
Good afternoon, good morning. It feels like the afternoon. Thank you for having me, and thank you to all the other speakers who were speaking. And first off, I want to acknowledge Coast Salish territory, Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish. So important, especially with this type of work, that we are on unceded territories and that we're on stolen land, and that I come in a good way, good heart, mind, and spirit. So I just wanted to share that. And yeah, it's just so good to hear thoughts back, and yeah, I'm just excited to hear how everyone thought. So all my relations.
Great, thanks JB. How are you today, Tabitha?
Hi, good morning, Katie. I am doing wonderful. I would also like to do a land acknowledgement. I am zooming in from the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh territories, and I'm happy to be here. And yeah, I'll pass it off to Norm.
Doing great here, sitting in the office. Yeah, just looking forward to hearing back from what other people thought. Thank you.
Great. Well, it's great to see you. We have 73 participants, and I see about maybe a dozen cameras on. So I'm again going to encourage people, in the spirit of having conversation and not just listening and observing, but actually engaging and being a part of the conversation. And again, would love to hear your voices. And so if anybody does have a question or a comment or something they want to discuss, a reflection, please go ahead and use the raise hand function. And in the meantime, I am going to get us started on a bit of a conversation or a bit of a discussion. And so, there was so much content in that video, and so I would love to hear. And then Devinder, I see you, and so I'm going to go to you in just 1 second. But there was one part in the video that you actually couldn't hear, and I obviously know it because I was sitting there, but Tabitha, we talked about land acknowledgements and territorial acknowledgements, and there was a part in the video where you said, keep doing those acknowledgements, and that question comes up a lot. What do we mean when we do a land? Does it mean anything? Is it just words? Are we paying lip service and then just moving on? And so, we did discuss it a little bit when we weren't on camera, and I'm wondering if you could just share your thoughts or reflections on that before we go over to Devinder.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it does mean something, especially to the people that have taken care of that land. Just giving them the respect and letting them know that, you are on unceded territories. So doing the land acknowledgement is very important.
And Tabitha, one of the questions that people have talked about is the difference between doing a land acknowledgement, acknowledging the land, or acknowledging the people. And Norm, you've talked to us about acknowledging the land. Tabitha, what are your thoughts on that? And JB, would be great to hear you maybe weigh in on that as well.
With the land acknowledgement and acknowledging the people, we've come a long way. So it just started recently that a lot of people are doing the land acknowledgement, and I feel like it's so important. I feel like it's so important to make sure that we do take care of the land, like Norm always says, Mother Earth, Grandmother Earth, because she was there first, and she's the one that takes care of us, and she's the one that always brings us the love and the care, and we need to acknowledge that. We need to make sure that we give back to her as well.
Yeah. JP, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, also I talk a little bit about how it's not just a physical act, it's also a spiritual act. So when you're going into someone else's territory, you want to say that you come with a good heart and mind and spirit and have that good intention of the work that you're wanting to do in these different territories. I'm come from the Newhalk Nation, that's north central west coast of BC. I'm not from this territory. So I have to be respectful. Even though I'm Indigenous, I still have to respect the territory that I walk on. And how I do that is in a spiritual way by saying I acknowledge the land, but also the ancestors that are there. So there's a purpose for everything. We're all related. That's what we talk about a lot as Indigenous people. We're related to the land. We're related to the animals, to the air, to the water. Everything is related. So that's why we say all my relations as well. So it's just so important. There's so many teachings that Indigenous people want to share, want to uplift, and we're here for it.
Thank you. Thanks, JB. Norm, do you have anything to add?
Well, to me, it's a reflection of what we call being in right relations. So to understand that we are in relationship with everything, right? We're part of, we're not separate. So we have to be in right relations with everything, not just everyone, but everything. And that's our understanding of what it means to be a good human being, using our gifts in a good way to maintain the balance of all things.
Thank you. Thank you, Norm. Devinder, lovely to see you. And if you want to do a quick introduction of yourself and go ahead, it's great to hear from you.
Hi, Katie. Thank you first of all to AMSA and speakers for doing a fantastic job and giving us so much valuable information and knowledge. I'm Devinder Chadha, and I'm a program director for Settlement Social Services and Language at Progressive Intercultural Community Services. We call it PICS. And I have listened to the talk from Norm for our multiculturalism project, and it was so valuable to listen to him and to see the similarities between all cultures, and seeing the First Nations, the Aboriginal culture is so valuable, so beautiful. You know, it's just, you will be surprised how much is there to give to others. I am so pleased and so surprised to see that we are so much behind to know about Aboriginal culture and about the traditions, and everything is so close to our mind, everything is so close to our spirit, and we are forgetting ourselves, I think, in this you know, chaos these days. And it was heartbreaking to hear that the murdered children remind us that nobody will ask us about the land if they're not there. I just got so emotional hearing to that line, and to giving in the end when, you know, JB said, you know, give our land back. So that was emotions coming out of yourself, and it's so natural. And I really appreciate that you are giving the knowledge to everyone and making everybody aware of your you know, feelings, and they're coming from your sincerity, from your true mind. And I also have seen since last little while, since I'm connecting with Aboriginal organizations, Aboriginal culture, and how we are, you know, appreciating and how we are connecting with each other, that yes, I agree that there was no education being given at the school level. It should start right from elementary levels, elementary school, and all the way to high schools, to include that in our curriculum, which is very much in need. And it has to be coming from the Aboriginal leaders, like they know the best. So they have to be consulted. There has to be some roundtable discussions, and eventually it should be included in the curriculum, what should be taught and how it should be taught. And even if they have to have an Aboriginal teacher, you know, teaching that curriculum, that would coming perfectly right from the mind. So I just wanted to appreciate this coming together and listening from all of you. It's a great resource. You are all excellent people giving us a huge among us of knowledge. And thank you, Katie, for organizing this. I appreciate it.
Norm, Tabitha, JB, do you have any comments or any reflections? Yeah, JB, go ahead.
So just from the last taping of this, yesterday was announced in Alberta, another 169 children have been found as well. So that's just been in the time that we've talked since we did taped. Also, just like the language about, like, I know that you said Aboriginal, but as Indigenous people here in Canada, we are steering away from that word Aboriginal, which is totally fine that you said it. It's all good. I just wanted to share and to say, like, a breakdown of that is, like, the reason why Canada used Aboriginal is because if you break down the word, ab is like abnormal. So saying like not normal, not original. So that's why they use these types of words, Aboriginal. They've now shifted it to Indigenous affairs, but it's like, there's like this ongoing different name changing, labeling of Indigenous people to just kind of confuse everybody, even our own communities. So we just like, when addressing Indigenous people, you could say Indigenous like as a whole, but if you know the nation of that person, like I'm Newhalk and Onondaga, I prefer that over Canadian, definitely not Canadian. So it's just very important that, but to use Indigenous, or most important, the nation of that person.
Yeah,
so,
can I say a little bit more, Katie? Just a question.
Yeah.
Yes, we need to learn more. I'm sorry.
No worries.
I need to know the difference between Aboriginal, Indigenous, and the other, names as well. Yes, need a lot more to know about it, not a lot more to learn. And my question is that, is there a sheet, information sheet that we can be provided to look at and then find all the differences and get to know about everything? So that would be very valuable for all of us to know deeply about it.
Yeah, there's this app actually that's been created where you can like text from the placement that you're in, what city, and it will text you back exactly what territory you're on. And they're just starting to like enhance that more and more. So there's this technology that's happening that's really connecting those types of information that needs to go out to the people. I'm not sure if maybe someone in the chat can like share that. That would be amazing. Yeah, and maybe even when you're working for whatever organization, you can implement that into your own, like as an action item into your own organization to find that out and to put that in your space, however you see fit. So yeah, totally. It's amazing. So that's one of the things that, like, language is very important, like how Canada has, in that way said we're not original. So that's like, it's so cool to deconstruct. Now we have these words, like I said, to deconstruct colonialism and put it on our terms, and how important our names of our nation is so important. So yeah.
I like the sorry about keep on going, Katie. Just one little comment. I really like the way that you described land, as it's very, just like relative, just like your own. And it's very similar to our culture, that we also consider earth as mother nature, and it just like a mother. And when people have, there's any talk about selling your property, they say, no, this is my like my mother. I don't want to sell it. It's like my mother. It came from my ancestors. So yes, I just love to know more about so maybe in following other presentations, and I'm looking forward to learn more. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Devinder. Norm, your face when JB said there was an app. He's like, oh, okay. These things, they just show up. They just happen to be there. Sangeeta, it's nice to see you. I'm gonna turn it over to you.
Thank you, Katie. And I guess it's still kind of 3 minutes till the morning left, so I'll just say good morning. And I want to first of all acknowledge that I'm joining all of you today from the traditional unceded and occupied lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, the Tsleil-Waututh and Quikitlem nations that the settlers now call Burnaby. And I acknowledge my privilege and honor to be living, working, playing, and thriving on this land as a settler. And that's one of the things that I have struggled with in my journey of learning Canada's history of colonization and dispossession of lands is my status in Canada as a Canadian citizen is given by a government that in many ways I now consider as illegitimate. And so, that I think that's a personal kind of self-reflection conversation that I continue on, and I have no opinions and knowledge to offer people because I'm still on that journey. But I loved the conversation, and the one thing I have to really acknowledge is that every time I bear witness to Indigenous people sharing, I am touched by the humility and the openness that and the forgiveness that they come to those conversations with. And when I think about myself and how I feel about, how India, which is my country of birth, was colonized, my ancestors fought for freedom. I still have a lot of unresolved anger, even though I was born in free India. So to see the forgiveness and the openness with which Indigenous people approach this struggle is very empowering for me. It's helping me deal with some of my own trauma. But the question that I had really was in terms of there's the self-education piece, and that's fine, but how do we in our work as people that are out in the community, I do consulting work with organizations that are looking at equity, diversity, and inclusion. And often the decolonization conversation is very difficult. Even in organizations that are quote unquote committed to EDI, the decolonization piece is very hard to bring up. And as a non-Indigenous person, I'm not even sure if I should be bringing it up because it's not my story and it's not my, in some ways, is it my struggle? Or how do I be, I don't want to use the word ally, but an accomplice or a co-conspirator in this effort to subvert the colonization of all our systems and institutions, including, nonprofits that have really good intentions, but I think sometimes we are equally a part of the system that's perpetuating the colonized structures. So that's kind of my thing, is how do we become co-conspirators, accomplices, not just witnesses to this struggle?
Okay, who wants to wrestle with that one first? Norm, do you want to take the first kick at the can?
Well, I address it by explaining to everyone that if you take your family line back far enough, there is a place where your ancestors lived for 1,000 years or more. And everyone is Indigenous to somewhere. And so your ancestors had that connection to land somewhere too. And in that history, there was colonization in your family history. And your ancestors had to deal with these exact same issues, but somewhere else and further back. So we share that history and those effects and those traumas. So it's not nobody's issue, because it doesn't even matter which side of the colonization your ancestors were on. It was traumatic. It was traumatic. Both sides of a war is trauma. So the question is, if it was up to us in this room, how we would agree to live together. Would we simply keep the same rules that we're living under now, or will we develop new ones? And that's the conversation we want to have.
If you look at different structures, like we'll take policing, for example, and those policies were like how they run and how they conduct themselves, and the culture of policing, because we can all see like the injustices, especially like in America, and how they were simply built on this racist policy. So how do we come from a place of not racism? How can we build our new structures of policies and procedure within our own organization that is not going to lead with harm to Indigenous people or lead harm to any of the people that are within your organization or within your community. How does your community look with not centering these acts of violence, that colonization, that patriarchy, that capitalism has affected all people around the world? So how do we effectively leave those things that are harmful and come from a place of the values of each of your own communities or organizations, beliefs and values, and build your policies and procedures or your structures of how you conduct the work that you do with people and center those values. And that's decolonization. It's not just decolonizing from an Indigenous perspective, because you have your own culture, songs, dances, language, ceremonies, and land that you come from. That's the difference. People think that colonization and decolonizing is just for Indigenous people. It's not. It's for all of us. It's together. And when we can decolonize and like bring maybe like the value of women's voices and centering women's voices, centering, you know, two-spirit people, trans people, LGBTQ, and saying that we're not going to lead with harming these types of people within our organization or the work that we do, then that's a part of decolonizing. That's what's up. It's about taking down those things that harm us on a daily basis that we don't even know, which is colonization, patriarchy, and capitalism. That's really driving a lot of the things that cause harm. So that's how you can build yourself up and rebuild in a fun new way. All my relations.
I think just to piggyback off of JB is, you know, decolonizing yourself or within yourself is to keep your language alive, keep your culture alive. Like people from Mexico, I just found out recently that that's actually a colonized language. Like Spanish is not their original language. And keeping myself like, my dad was a survivor of residential school, so I'm the first generation to not go to residential school. And he lost his language. So he had to learn English. And then when he was put in the system, he had to move and relocate to California. And he had to learn Spanish because they didn't know how to speak English. And when he came back, like my family adopted him back into our family. Like he lost both his parents due to residential school. And he had to relearn his culture. He had to relearn how to understand and speak and live in the Native community again. And for myself, I wanted to learn because that was something that was ripped away from him. I wanted to learn my language. I wanted to continue that bloodline. I wanted to make sure that my son knows how to speak and understand our native tongue as well. So he knows more than I do, actually. And it's amazing that these kids are just like sponges. Like they just take, and they learn. And yeah, coming back to decolonizing is just keep your culture alive, keep your language alive, keep your, you know, who you are. Make sure that you don't change that into a colonial world that we live in today.
Thank you to you both. I think one of the things that after we finished filming, that just grabbed me was keep your name. And it just seemed to make so much sense to me in that moment. And it's something that we hadn't talked about as an act of decolonization, which is to keep your name. And I think has so much relevance in our sector. So I have some people who want to jump in, which is awesome. So nice to see some enthusiastic participation. So Sankalp, I'm going to go to you. I hope I pronounced your name okay. Yeah, good. Okay, thank you. And so we'll go to Sankalp and then Winnie and then Layla.
Thank you all of you for being here. This was a very needed discussion. I remember somebody in the video said government is supposed to protect people and that hit her. I'm sorry, I'm not very good with names, so I don't remember the name. But similarly, when you said something like keep your language, even though I know that, but sometimes you try to mix in the second culture or wherever you are and you forget that these things are important. So thank you for that. Language is definitely a huge part of your culture. And I just wanted to ask you guys, social work has a lot of high burnout rates, right? And all of us have to do our self-care. But above that, you're also dealing with intergenerational trauma and such busy schedules. What does your self-care looks like? Thank you.
That's a great question. I like that. Norm, do you want to start? And then Tabitha, or Tabitha, Tabitha actually muted, so Tabitha gets to go first.
Well, with my self-care is I actually like going back home. So I live in Burnaby and I go back to Vancouver Island. So when I feel like I'm overwhelmed or I feel like I'm exhausted, I go back to my home territories and I actually sit with Mother Earth. Like I go to the water. I just let it all out. That's part of my self-care. But other things is like doing my makeup, doing my nails. That's another self-care that I love to do, is just to make sure that I do have time to make sure that I'm taking care of myself, because if I'm not taking care of myself, I can't take care of other people. I can't take care of my son. I can't do my job. So it's really important that I'm still learning. Like I'm still learning to say no. That's a hard word for me to say sometimes, is saying no, but that's also another part of self-care as well. So that's just what I do.
Thanks, Tabitha. I'm a nails person too. Norm, do you get your nails done for self-care? Do you have other ways of doing self-care that you could share with us?
Go to the land, open your spirit to let the love of the land in. Once you learn how to do that, you don't need anything else. It's like the recharging, like it's the source. It's like, it'll overfill your batteries if you learn how. So do that. I guess I'll have to do some workshops and seminars how to do that.
All right, we'll line you up for some self-care workshops. JB, what about you? Can you respond to that one as well?
Yeah, most definitely is like through my artistry. I talked about it in the video, is like really like connecting to your gift. So everyone has a gift, and if that's a physical, mental, emotional, spiritual gift, and it's like when you're practicing your gift, that's like good medicine, not only for others to witness what you're doing, but also good medicine for yourself. So it's just good medicine all around to help uplift your spirit. And to me, during pandemic, it's been so hard because a lot of our ceremonies were not able to access during the pandemic, but it's been like, I really miss our different events that we have. So if it's like a powwow, that's like an amazing event. If you hear if there's a powwow in your community, I encourage you to go check it out and see what it's all about. There's an awesome event that happens every year, Nisga'a New Year, called Ho'ovi'eh. And if you see different Native events, I encourage you to go there. We are such a welcoming people. We want all people to come to our public events and experience what we experience and experience that medicine. And definitely going to the land, the water, going to the mountains, the trees. These are all medicines that the Creator gave to us so that we could heal ourselves. And it's very important to heal yourself and do that self-work on yourself. And if you're just exploring what your gift is, that can really connect you, because what happens when we are fatigued or whatever, we're not meant to be connected to spirit or to creator. And all of these things are can reconnect you. I do a lot of sewing, I do lots of beading, and that's the time that I spend with my ancestors, is when I'm creating those different items. And that's one of my other gifts as well. So I encourage you to find what your gift is and practice it.
So we're going to go to Winnie and then Layla.
Hello, everyone. My name is Winnie. I am Katie's assistant. I am fresh off the press. This is my second day. Firstly, let me start by saying it's a privilege and an honor to be in a space where we can watch you be authentically yourself as the Indigenous people. I speak in my capacity as an immigrant coming in from South Africa. I know that oftentimes history is written from the perspective of the perpetrator, and it's always hard when you're coming in into this space and you now want to share your truth authentically. I appreciate, it was amazing to say the least to watch you share your truth, but to be respectful, and you seem to hold no grudges, and you truly do want to map a way forward. So I just wanted to thank you for that. My question sort of piggybacks off what Sangeeta was saying. Like I said, I know oftentimes history is written and taught from the perspective of the perpetrator. Now that we are learning from you as the Indigenous people, your truth, I know that as an immigrant, it puts us in this awkward space, like what Sangeeta was saying, where we now feel that myself as a permanent resident and as a citizen, I realize that perhaps my residency or citizenship was conferred upon me illegitimately. So moving forward, what would you want, ideally, I know it's a loaded question, what would you want to see from us as immigrants coming in and saying, we are learning your truth, we do want to coexist with you peacefully and respectfully as well? What are some of the things that we can do to sort of say, yes, whilst I am grateful to be Canadian, I also acknowledge your truth?
Beautifully put. Thank you, Winnie. JB, I'm dying to hear you jump in on this one. So I'm going to pass it over to you first.
I was like waiting for Norm, because he's like...
Later, I'll wait. You can go later.
But no, I'm happy to share that. It's about what happens a lot is a lot of people have misperceptions about Indigenous people, or like are hard on Indigenous people because they may not know the history. So I just like really want you to like really, there's a lot that has to be learned. We are still learning about different things that have happened to our people. And it's like no Indigenous person should be homeless on their own territory. No Indigenous woman should be killed in or feel unsafe in their own territory. No Indigenous person should have no clean water. There's just so many things, and I just like hope like when you do hear things, it's like there's so many resources for people to see and to seek out. So, and I know we shared some, so just keep on that. And we as Indigenous people, I don't think we're not saying like go away to any type of people. We're just saying, you know, respect us, because we're always disrespected. Oh my gosh. That's how I feel. But yeah, that's my answer on my relations.
Thanks, JB. Norm, you're posting some pieces in the chat, but let's hand this over to you. And I really, you know, I think Winnie, you made a very good point about, you know, being citizenship conferred upon you by a government that, you know, we question the legitimacy. And I think I'll back that up and saying, you know, by birthright, I have been given the inherited and unearned privilege of, you know, being a white settler and a Canadian. And so, Norm, we've talked about this before, but I'd love to hear you grapple with this with the group.
Well, real change is going to come from shifting public opinion, right? The government is not going to lead this. So we have to go over their heads to the people. And if we can start a movement, something here that will have ripple effects throughout all our other contacts, all our other organizations, then we can extend the conversation. The conversation has to include everybody. And these ideas do not apply just to us. They apply to all humanity. And humanity needs to reevaluate the foundation assumptions and principles that so far it's been based on for the last 1,000 years, because it has led us to this cliff of climate disaster, this cliff of division, of conflict. And we remember, it wasn't that long, we know we had a way that worked. We have a 15,000-year track record of sustainable living here in these lands. And from our experience, colonized society in ways has not accumulated 15 minutes of successful, sustainable living here in these lands. And follow JB's hashtag, land back.
Tabitha, did you want to weigh in, or should we keep going? We've got 2 people who want to ask questions. We have 8 minutes left. These things always go by so fast. We're good? Okay, all right, Layla and then Huda.
Thank you, and just thank you so much for everything that you've shared so far. It's been really powerful and really humbling, and I'm grateful to listen to everything that you shared. My name's Layla. I'm a first-generation Iranian Canadian settler on stolen, occupied Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam lands. And so I really grew up myself sort of torn between 2 worldviews, and I'm aware of how strong worldviews can be and how those can actually inform people in a way that I think when you're just part of one, it might be a little bit invisible because it's just sort of structured to be your norm. But I really was always aware of the difference between, you know, sort of Western white supremacist, like hegemonic values, and sort of the Eastern or just really non-Western values that I think a lot of folks have been sharing, these connections of more sort of collectivist, family-based, spiritual, intergenerational sort of cultures. And I think that they're sort of globally being really infiltrated by like Western imperialism and sort of global capitalism and these things that you've touched on. So, you know, growing up here, I really appreciate what you said about encouraging folks from other cultures to keep their culture and keep their worldviews here. And, you know, something I try to talk about with my family a lot in my community, but definitely, you know, working in settlement or being sort of first generation, you're aware of how much folks that come here are sort of really like sort of indoctrinated through the language and through employment and through history and stuff into Western culture, right? Like there's a lot of pressure to succeed by adapting to that. And I wonder about how there can be more sort of solidarity and connection across communities that share cultural values that are not to decenter sort of the whiteness and white supremacy system that doesn't really serve. And then some barriers that come up often are language-based. Like I think about folks that, you know, might not be able to participate in a conversation like this or in a talk like this because of language barriers. I know that my mom and many of her friends are nervous about sort of language and don't always understand discussions about anti-racism, decolonizing practices, that sort of thing. So like, something I'm thinking about and wondering about ways that connections can be built through culture, but really giving folks that come here the option to really embrace and share their own culture and then connect with other cultures other than the dominant white system, despite sort of language barriers. So if there's been like programs or events or ways that you found have really helped newcomers have the option to that path, I would love to hear or learn more about that.
That's awesome. Thank you, Layla. That's a really great question. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a pin in that, and I've got a little summary of it. I'm going to go to Huda and get Huda's question. Then what we'll do is we'll go to JB, Tabitha, and Norm for some closing comments and incorporate the answers into those questions in that, because we've only got a few minutes left. So Huda, I'm going to go to you, and then we'll set up for some closing comments.
Thank you so much. Just being mindful of the time. My name is Huda. I'm from, my ancestors are from India, Iran, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. And I'm serving as the community engagement programmer at South Vancouver Neighborhood House. And I find that this forum has been so powerful and so, it has given so much information. And I feel that it falls really on the shoulders of a lot of different levels for the community to really understand all this. Because we come together as representatives of organizations, something that Layla was also mentioning, but when it comes to the level of the community, where it really matters, because that's where the roots are, and that's where the tree is growing from. The community is very much unaware. It doesn't know. I'm serving from South Vancouver, and South Vancouver, if I am not lying or I'm not exaggerating, it is almost 90% immigrants. And just to be safe, I will say that it is 80% new immigrants. And the immigrants, when they did come, the first generation that did come to South Vancouver, there was no education in the schools. There was nothing being taught. And the second generation didn't get a chance to learn either. And it is now only recently that maybe the third generation is learning a little bit about the Indigenous history and about the residential schools and about the 60s schools, about the teachings, about the cultures and the traditions. So when we are looking at this population, what we are looking at is work that needs to be done at the level of the individual. It needs to be done at the level of the institutions and the organizations and at the level of the community, because these three are interconnected. We cannot be working in one portion and forget about the rest, because it needs to be simultaneously covered with everything and always. And I think that's where we as organizations come together, that when we have this learning, we actually make an effort as organizations to partner with the Indigenous organizations, to partner with the Indigenous elders. And that's something that I would just like to share here, that South Vancouver Neighborhood House actually has an Indigenous Advisory Council that sits and plans everything that we plan for, all programs that we plan for, it goes through them. And they actually make it work in a way that we are being conscious and we are very aware of the lands that we are on and that we are honoring the cultures and the traditions. And I feel that these are small steps that when we are taking it to the community and the community is coming for programs and services into the organizations, that they feel that presence of the Indigenous cultures in our organizations, that our organizations, the buildings that are their homes that they're coming to are not barren of that history. So that's just something that I wanted to really share. And it's not that much of a question as it is something to be aware of, and as a request that as organizations, we really need to make an effort to make sure that we are making the community aware.
Absolutely, absolutely. And thank you, Huda, for kind of centering and bringing that back, because at the end of the day, that is AMSA's role. Our role is to support organizational development and understanding. And so, you know, you've kind of brought that back for me. So I appreciate that. So we're going to go to some closing remarks. I'm going to give a minute to each of you. It'll kick us over a few minutes. I hope people can hang in there with us for a few minutes. It would be great to hear in your closing comments, JB and Norm and Tabitha, about building connections through culture. and about embracing and sharing cultures outside of that dominant white culture and connecting people together and community connections and just all about those connections. And so who wants to start and jump in? Norm or Tabitha or JP?
Start with being comfortable with being uncomfortable and having those uncomfortable conversations. So make it normal to ask these questions, make it normal to, ask where you're from, like not just, oh, I'm from Canada, like no, but where does your bloodline come from? So just make sure that you ask those uncomfortable questions and allow yourself to learn from, our people.
Thank you. Norm or JB?
Okay. Yeah, it's been such a cool experience to see kind of the intersections and how these intersections have been connecting, because we reflect each other. Like we've all mentioned, we've all been a part of some type of entity who is like executing like white supremacy onto or views or values that aren't our own in whatever place that we come from. And to me, seeing the intersections where we can like uplift each other, where I seen it a lot recently was like when 215 children were found in Kamloops. Because I was a part of a lot of the rallies and speaking about it. And what I was noticing a lot is like the Muslim community and Punjabi community all coming to like the rallies and giving their condolences. And that was so powerful to see that and to see that connection with each other. I really feel like the leadership of like Jagmeet Singh was a big part of that, seeing other nations stand up for the injustices and how it was affecting other communities as not just Indigenous communities. And that was so powerful. It felt like, oh, someone finally sees us. Other communities are connecting to us and want to help us. Like, really? Like, that's so powerful. Like, we just think we're always on our own. And yeah, we see, other communities like come to the rallies, but we didn't see like cultural leaders or cultural people come from like from the Muslim community. One of their leaders came to the rally to come speak and talk about giving their condolences and how they want to connect and how can they connect and support Indigenous people. And I was like, wow, like that just like made my spirit soar. And I think that's where I want to be. That's where I want to connect. That's the intersection that I want to be at in building community, healing communities. I do lots of workshops, like I said, with youth. I've done a lot of, I've done some workshops like with Jennifer Reddy for immigrant and refugee. And then the most powerful workshop that I've been at was with Rainbow Refugee. And that was like so powerful. And they said it was the most attended workshop because it was talking about Indigenous like current events and what was happening, and those young people really wanted to educate themselves. So the work is happening. Remember that decolonizing is not a linear line. It's to me, I feel like decolonizing is like a wave. So if you want to break it down into like Squid Game kind of style shapes, colonization is a box and it will always try to fit you into a box that you don't want to be in. Decolonizing is like a wave. it's like a journey. You're gonna feel ups, you're gonna feel downs, you're gonna feel ups, and you're gonna feel downs. And sometimes you might make some mistakes. Sometimes you'll have this amazing high where you're like, yes. And then to me, practicing your own culture, decolonizing is, or practicing after you unlearn, is when you practice your own culture and take pride in who you are. And that's a circle. So that's ongoing all the time. So square, waves, circle. And if you can go into that journey and take pride, what Tabitha was talking about, practicing and keeping alive your own culture, that's what it's all about. And all your teachings will come through, and then respecting Indigenous culture and creating a safe space for people of Indigenous people. If you're going to ask them to do this type of work, be advisors or, share with you, create safe spaces for Indigenous voices, create spaces for those voices to thrive. And sometimes we try to go too fast, and then if we're rushing, we make a little bit of mistakes, or but if you take your time and just listen and create safe spaces, then that's what's up. That's where we can really thrive together in these beautiful intersections, and reconstructing whatever values from your own terms, not on colonialism, white supremacy, patriarchy, capitalism. We don't need to start from that. We can take that away and then start from where our values are. You have your teachings, and in having Indigenous teachings within that to be a marker or a way of guidance as well, but in a safe way and not rushing. Because in what's happening in our school systems, the curriculum is changing, but they're rushing through it. So there's some harm that's happening. So we got to take our time. So take your time, breathe. Hey, all my relations.
Beautiful. Thank you, JB. Okay, Norm, take us home.
Oh, well, each of you, look inside yourself about what you know about yourself. What brings you here today? What brings you to your work? Each of us works for nonprofits. Each of us works, well, every nonprofit exists to address one or another injustice. They don't, if there was no need for, if that injustice didn't exist, our nonprofits wouldn't need to be here. So each of you is motivated by a desire to help. And recognize that and celebrate that in yourself, because we have that too. That's why we do. None of us is here for the wealth or the glory or the fame. We're here because it feeds our souls, our spirits, to help the people and hopefully the land. So recognize that, and recognize these people who share that with you. We share that, and that's what can unite us and connect us. And then we have to learn, and I always bring that back to my two rules: listen and help. And then we have to learn how to stand beside each other while we do this work, while we help each other. Stand beside, not in front of, not behind, beside. And that's the beauty of the circle. In the circle, we're all beside. And who knows what's possible when we can do that, And I think that's where we're getting. And standing beside each other in the circle, then we can create those ripples. And then we can help each other, and we'll get helped at the same time too. So with that, I extend hands to the side, to this big circle that we have here in this room, to each of you in this circle. Extend your hands to the side and grab on and say, yes, we're all facing injustices and challenges, and we all want to help. So let's help each other so that we can also accept help. And with that, it's We'll see you out there.
See you out there. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Norm. Thank you, Tabitha. Thank you, JB, for bringing so much of yourselves and your generous gift that you've shared with us today. We would love to hear from you, how today went for you, how you're feeling. There's just a couple of questions in there. It's very open-ended. But I saw the chat, there were some great comments, so let's grab those. So if you want to scan the QR code, that's great. Otherwise, we'll also send a link out for those of you that are not in a QR code scanning kind of place. Again, a big thank you to the Ministry of Municipal Affairs for bringing us together for this conversation today. And of course, to all of you for your emotional time and energy and your honesty and your willingness to participate and share of yourselves. And this will not be the last time we see each other. We will see each other again very, very soon. But please enjoy the rest of your day, and we will talk later. Bye, everyone.